started. Let's all settle down, and then I think it's about time. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome today to another great IIT alumni gathering in the Bay Area. So, I am Aman Walia, IIT Bombay, one of the volunteers in the Bay Area, and pretty much welcome you all from a whole bunch of volunteers who put a lot of effort into making all these things happen. So let me begin today's evening by welcoming you all and to a very interesting journey. So if you recollect some time back, so this was an interesting article which came out. I don't remember the source of this article somewhere, but it said that, the IIT alumni are the fourth largest creators of what you say wealth in the entrepreneurship world. And this triggered a lot of questions, a lot of that what is it we IITians do? So Stanford has StartX, and there are multiple infrastructures which many alumni work out of, but what do IITians do? And so it's been a plan for us for nearly 3-4 years. We've been thinking about. Let me give you some interesting statistics here. So, till the mid 2010s or whatever, the total strength who used to go into the big 5 IITs used to be in the range of 1,200, 1,300 people. And out of which, make a rough guess that about 50% of the people came here. So for about 60 years, roughly about 400 to 500 people came for grad studies out here in the US. And they are the source which became entrepreneurs and built companies, were successful. The interesting thing is that this is not even half the graduating class of any of these other institutes you see out there. And the other interesting fact is that the IIT alumni who came to the US essentially did not have the infrastructure of having an office, having an endowment, having employees to network, no networking platforms, and still, with all these handicaps, they really created big corporations, were successful entrepreneurs, technologists, whatever. So obviously, the demand or the need for creating a platform which essentially can compete with something similar was very much there. An interesting event about 6 months back when in our discussion, like Monishi had a freshly wired heart, and we said that he decided to retire. And Monishi, as a background, he has set up, he started many of the Pan-IIT institutions we benefit from these days. So we immediately ran up to him and said, hey, we can't let you retire. We want you to take this extremely difficult project and put it into motion, right? So that's how we are here, and this is going to be a journey, and all of us are going to be part of this journey. How it's going to unfold in the next few years, it will require a lot of creativity, it will require a lot of work, and obviously a lot of challenges. But let me call Monishi, who actually is the mover for this, and to start today's event. Monishi.
Fellow IITians, ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome to all of you. I've been given the task of introducing Vinod Khosla and Umang Gupta. That's an easy task because everybody knows who they are. So what I want to really dwell on is this little journey that we've had. at the time when Vinod started Sun Microsystems, he didn't have the power of the IIT name behind him. And so many other entrepreneurs like Umang, Suhas, and many others, they had to break through and pave the beaten path and make it smooth for us. So in 2003, when we started the Pan IIT movement, we decided to put all these success stories together, and we had a presentation by CBS 60 Minutes, which was aired all over America 3 times. And some of the key things that were said there, which shocked the hell out of the American public. Vinod said, we are not just entrepreneurs, we have generated hundreds and thousands of jobs here in America for the American people. That's recorded on 60 Minutes. So a powerful statement like that suddenly made everybody awake to the fact that, hey, these Indian guys are not just cheap programmers and labor arbitrage people. They are people who are entrepreneurs. And that 60 Minutes video also showed about the rigors that we went through in IIT in terms of our training. And I remember Vinod making that statement that after I came through IIT Delhi and joined Carnegie Mellon, it was like cruising out there, And to cap it, Narayan Murthy said, my son couldn't get into IIT, so he went to Cornell. So this sort of suddenly changed the perception of what IITians are. And then from 2003 onwards, we've seen a rapid acceptance of IITians, a lot of funding, and there's been a tremendous surge growth. But in the process of that growth, what has happened is in the last couple of years, we have had several unicorns, IITians. Dheeraj is here, Bipul is here. Unfortunately, Jyoti Bansal had a bereavement in his family and he can't make it today. And there are many more who have made it through that. But when Aman asked me to take up this task, I started surveying people and VCs about where are the weaknesses. There has been some slippages among IITians. Where are the weaknesses? And it typically falls into not the technical area. They say technically from the technology and the engineering point of view, IITians are second to nobody. But when it comes to the commercial side, fundraising, the marketing, the business side, there are gaps that need to be covered. We need to address that. So I said, okay, we will put together a very powerful group of former founders, successful founders who can advise people. And I will dwell on this when I come back to it about what our path ahead is in the last session. Okay, so this is the road ahead that we want to basically, today we are having unicorns, we are fourth. We don't want to be fourth, we want to be number 1. Okay, there's a gentleman sitting there, he's the chief operating officer of StartX, which is the Stanford Accelerator. Hey, stand up, why don't you stand up? Come on, Siddharth, come on, stand up. That's him. He's afraid, he's very nervous about he's talking about partnerships with us, he wants to partner with IITians, So I said, no, hold it, let's get past you and then we talk about that. Actually, you know what, they don't play it straight. If you look at the numbers of Stanford guys who've made it to those billion-dollar clubs, half of those guys are probably IITians, but they look at the last degree. Yeah, I'm telling you, these guys even claim Vinod is a Stanford graduate. He's not a Stanford, he's an IIT graduate. So we will change on those numbers. But basically, we are forming a non-profit accelerator, and we want to make the service of free workshops for all our alumni or anybody, a startup, whether it's an advanced stage or whether it's early stage or whether it's a wannabe. There are many people who are saying, oh, I'm going to do a startup, but he's still trying to figure out which way he wants to move. So basically, this is the path along which we move. And for that, we are very, very grateful to all our pioneers, Vinod, Umang, Suhas, and so many others who have helped us build that name on which we are riding the big wave in. Okay, with that, may I hand over to you, Umang?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Manishi. I know you've expressed your gratefulness to us, but all of us here express our gratefulness to you too. You've done a fantastic job. I look around, look at an amazing audience, lots of young people, and I hope you'll find this a very, very useful, interesting, and entertaining event. And I'm going to start off with no further ado, but basically telling you how we're going to do this particular session. In this session, it's mainly a fireside chat with Vinod. And my job in this particular fireside chat is just to have a few questions, and possibly along the way, if there are some follow-up questions and that makes sense, we'll kind of do that. Keep it very, very interactive, very simple, but mostly I want to let Vinod tell you what he's learned about many of the things that I think you're going to be interested in, and probably the most important thing you're going to be interested in, I suspect, because this is all about startups, is what is the secret? Is there a single mantra? Is there a single secret or a set of ingredients that make for a successful startup or an entrepreneur? And Vinod, with all the amazing companies that you've funded, and of course companies you've built yourself, what's the answer to that? What's anything you would impart that perhaps a single mantra or a set of ingredients that make for a successful startup?
Can I start with a question? How many people here are entrepreneurs? And how many people want to be entrepreneurs? Great. It's great to speak to such an audience. I love speaking to entrepreneurs. The secret to entrepreneurship is just be with smart people. You look very smart if you fund Dheeraj or Bipul. We funded both those Rubrik and Nutanix, and you just look smart if you do. So associate yourself with the right people. But putting a team together to do a startup is a non-trivial task. And I have a paper on my website that I actually published in TechCrunch many, many years ago called Engineering the Gene Pool of a Startup. It isn't by accident, and it's not just collecting people, it's collecting the people you need for the task you have at hand. It's a very specific and mathematical almost process of assembling the right team. And I would say 80% of startups don't pay enough attention to it, 80%. And they lower their probability of success or the magnitude of success they're going to have by just reducing the talent pool they have. And I can't emphasize that enough. Even when we started Sun, we just collected talent in the first 15 people at Sun. And this was a long time ago. It was Andy Bechtolsheim. Bill Joy didn't want to join. I convinced Andy Bechtolsheim to drop his PhD when he thought he was less than 6 months away to join. I parked out of Bill Joy's office when he wouldn't even talk to me to try and recruit him. And he was finishing his PhD, and he dropped his PhD. So it was selling, and it was persistence, and it was not being ashamed of just hanging out and being a bother. And then we hired Eric Schmidt in the first 15 people. We hired Carol Bartz, who went on to run Autodesk and Yahoo. So we had, in the first 15 people, there's probably $10 billion startups that were started out of the first 15. Now, that could have been accidental, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was 25. What I knew I enjoyed was really smart people, and I wanted to hang around and learn from them. My son's 24, almost 25. He started 2 companies. And I said, do the same thing. Engineer the gene pool. And he said, And he went through YC last batch in August, and he asked the YC guys, what should the option pool be for other hires? And they said 10%. And he came home and he said, what do you think? And I said, you should keep a 60% option pool.
Yep.
It was the only YC startup out of 100 and some that had an option pool even greater than 30%. It was 60%. As a result, he's assembled a team that no 25-year-old should be able to assemble. And so people is really important in having a process around who you need and build that team. That's absolutely key.
So just to follow up on that question, many of the folks here, IITians, they go techies, they've gone to this amazing techie institutes, and not all of them have learned the art of finding the right people, recognizing who they are, and even when you bring them in, even if you get the mechanics of it right with pools, option pools, et cetera, just the instincts of recognizing them. And then to be able to follow that up with managing them, managing competing people, et cetera, et cetera. What did you have that perhaps you can say to yourself, if you've got those kind of instincts at age 25, that gives you a better chance of success?
Yeah, and I realized this much later as to what was important. I think I decided very early I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And it was really true. And so, most people, when they're assembling a team, they have very definitive views. I need this person, and I know this person. Who you know is likely not in the network of people you really need. So if you start with what you need, you might come up with very different people than what your connections are. That's one. Two, if you're a techie engineer, have a brilliant idea for a new architecture or a new design of something, the chances you know what a good marketing person is pretty close to zero. Right? So how do you evaluate people in areas? And the more you think you know, the more likely you are to make a mistake. And at one level, I felt I could learn anything, but I also never felt I knew stuff. And so I always asked lots of people. I didn't use their opinions. I used the input they provided me to integrate my own opinion. It's a really important process. I have another document, and I write all these documents mostly for entrepreneurs. One's called Engineering the Gene Pool of a Company. The other one's called The Art of Hiring. How do you hire a CFO if you've never worked with a CFO? You're an engineer, you've never worked with a CEO. No matter how brilliant you are, you don't know what to look for in a CFO or in a VP of marketing. And so there's a process, and I have a whole document I won't go into here called The Art of Hiring. I think it's something like that. It's on our website. And I have a lot of videos on these kind of tactical things entrepreneurs face. But evaluating a marketing person is very hard. And if you ask somebody at IBM who the marketing person, who a good marketing person is, they don't have a clue what startup marketing is like. It's about experimenting, it's trying things, not knowing anything. It's figuring it out as opposed to having a preview. On the drive here, I was talking to one of our entrepreneurs, and I said, everything people had advised you is probably wrong. This was about a go-to-market strategy for, of all things, robotic furniture. As crazy as it sounds, it's an incredibly interesting opportunity. Their goal is to take every 400 square foot studio apartment and turn it into a 1,000 square foot apartment because the closet folds away, the bed folds away, it moves up and down, and so you can have a desk or a couch or a bed in a small 400 square foot space. It's a cool idea. It multiplies space, and I care about space multiplication because it's building efficiency. It's very hard to get efficiency in building by factors of 2 or 3 any other way. So as crazy as it sounds, it's a cool idea. And I said, just assume all the advice you're getting is just ideas to try as experiments. We went through 10 experiments he should run in the next 6. And most of my caution was, don't assume you know the answer. It's so easy to assume you know the answer, especially in new areas. In enterprise, it's a lot easier to experiment within a narrow bound. But in many areas, it's not. So the less you pretend you know, the more likely you are to learn faster, ask a lot more questions, solicit a lot of input, but then make your own decisions. And I think I learned that very early.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up, one more to that, because I think ultimately what you're describing is a mechanism by which you kind of sit back, try and learn, not sit back, but you try and learn from other people. You try and hire people who are better than you at various aspects of work, whether it's marketing, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you still apply your intuition to kind of making these choices. Sometimes, by the way, that intuition can be right, sometimes it can be wrong, you can make mistakes, but presumably if you make those mistakes, you fix them. But one of the questions I bet you many of the people in this audience probably are asking, what if you don't have some of that intuition and you still are a damn good techie engineer? You're very good at building a product, but you really don't have the instincts and the intuition to recognize good marketing or CFO, et cetera, or even do all that. What do you recommend? Should they find a partner? Should they go find a co-founder? What are some of the things you might want?
Absolutely. You want to build teams.
Yeah.
And co-founders is very different than hiring a person.
Right.
Because they're not, if you hire somebody, they're not in the kitchen cabinet.
Yeah.
Recall, every startup has a kitchen cabinet, the people you consult or take a walk with after dinner or have a coffee with. And most important things sort of gel in these informal conversations. Building that right team is very important. And I'd say, and I've written about this also, the single hardest thing an entrepreneur does is decide whose judgment to trust on what topic.
Yeah.
Because for every topic, there's a different person who's qualified to give you an opinion. Right. And almost any topic in a startup world, everybody will give you an opinion. And which ones to reject is as important as which ones to take. But it's one of the hardest things entrepreneurs do. And frankly, it's something that good entrepreneurs can help you with.
So last question in that general area. What are the things you're looking for when you see a team in front of you, or even one entrepreneur or a co-founder or two people? What's this set of things you're looking for that cause you to say, you know what, this is a winning team, I can fund it. Or even if it's not a winning team, I have enough faith that the founder or co-founders will make a winning team.
Yeah. So here's a few things I would say.
Yeah.
By and large, it's not what people think.
Okay.
So great teams, at that level, everybody says, hey, we want great teams. I've never had somebody come in, present on their deck, we have a crappy team. Nobody ever said that. If somebody says we have an incomplete team, I suddenly respect them a lot more because they know what they don't have.
Yeah.
Right? People who try and hide that fact tells me a lot about what they're not good at, right? So really, really important that people know. I think too much experience is a real problem. Most experts are experts in a previous version of the world, not the version of the world you're trying to create. And most great startups are trying to create a new world. Mm-hmm. And so experts don't help. I find experience is generally a bias. The right amount of bias is a good thing, but too much of it leads to I already know all the answers. And when you have dealing with new technology or new markets, that kind of bias that I already know is really a disadvantage and leads to lots of big mistakes. So I'm generally, this is why people who don't have experience in an area, sometimes people say younger people, but I don't think it's young or old. It's people who don't have an experience in an area do much better if they're fast learners. People always get surprised. We're investing in healthcare. I will not invest in a healthcare company that has a CEO who's ever worked in healthcare. Just won't do it. Why? Because they bring too many biases to the party. You can add healthcare people later. Let me put it this way. Why did Tesla innovate electric cars and Waymo do driverless cars and Volkswagen and GM couldn't? Why couldn't Walmart innovate retail? Why did Amazon have to do it? Why didn't Boeing and Lockheed do space? It's SpaceX. Why did Twitter and YouTube and Facebook do media and not the media guys? I looked back 25, 30 years, and I couldn't find one example of a major innovation that came out of experienced people. It almost always came out of people who were smart and then were open-minded and figured it out. And business school would tell you, if you Google, don't go start an unrelated business like driverless cars. Or if you're Amazon, don't start AWS. But smart people who are on fast learning curves do much better than all the conventional wisdom. So too much experience is a bad thing. Too much of an assumption you know what you're doing is a bad thing. So very counterintuitive. And very diverse teams, very open-minded teams. I love to challenge people. And if I feel like they already know too much, that's not a good sign.
Good. So you pretty much said, you've essentially, your reputation has always been as a contrarian thinker. And that's pretty much what you just said. You want people who are contrarian thinkers, but also fast learners.
Fast learners is very key.
And expertise is less important than learning ability and fast learning. And of course, combine that with their ability to put together a team which requires emotional intelligence, I'm sure, the ability to kind of have these instincts. All those are the ingredients.
Well, knowing what you don't know is really, really important. Good. And the more innovative the space, the more breakthrough the technology, the less likely you are to understand all the nuances and all the implications. And the more you say, I'm in learning mode, the better you will do.
So speaking of breakthroughs, let's move for a second from the immediate things that an entrepreneur here might want, which is the bits and bytes of getting going, to a big picture question. You've often said that every area of world GDP in the world is ripe for disruption. And very specifically, you've talked of health and medicine, food and food production, financial services, manufacturing and construction, transportation and space, energy, water, climate. Those are very, very different things from what I suspect 90% of the people here are generally familiar with, typically enterprise software, hardware, et cetera, et cetera. So
but I did say people are better off working in areas they're not too familiar with.
That's true. That's true. So clearly,
so be open-minded.
Be open-minded. I think I would love for, maybe you could just talk about some very specific things in these areas, maybe where other people believe something, but you're skeptical about it, and you have a contrarian play, and you believe that this is what's going to cause changes or disruption.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of examples. First, I'm 62, 63 soon, and I sort of said, I still work easily 80 hours a week. I easily work 80 hours a week. And I love working. But I said, if I'm going to do this for the next 20 years, and as long as I'm healthy, I'll be working 80 hours a week. Health is one of those things you can never predict, so touch wood, you hope you're lucky. But my dad was pretty lucky, and if I am, I'll be working next 20 years, 80 hours a week. But it's worth asking, what do you want to work on? Especially if you don't have to pay your mortgage or worry about the little things or the important things. Your kids going to college or all those other things. My kids are all in their 20s. They're all grown up. In last August, I wrote a document on what I want to work on. And I said, I want to work on really cool technology that has large impact. And I wrote this document, and I just started writing. And what I do for couple of weeks in August, I'd hike for 4 hours in the morning in the Sierras and make notes for me. There was no cell phone service where I was. I'd come back and start writing. After 2 weeks, I had 50 pages of writing I'd done, which is only about 4 pages, 3 pages a day. And I fundamentally took non-governmental parts of the US GDP and asked the question, was there an area, large area of the US GDP that could not be innovated with radical technology, where the improvement in efficiency, whatever it is, cost, amount of building material you use in a building, amount of steel you need for cars, could you reduce it? It's easy to see how you make it 5%, 10% more efficient, 20% more efficient. Hard to see how you make it 200 or 500%. And here's the surprising thing. I discovered that there wasn't a single area, large area I could think of where you couldn't get hundreds of percent improvement in efficiency, cost, accessibility with technology. This is really, really exciting, and I was like all energized. I was like I was 24 again. Like, I have all these things to work on and not enough time. Over the last 2.5 weeks, I published this document in 17 sections on Medium, about 3 pages, 2-3 pages a day. And sometime this weekend or next week, I'm going to publish all 50 pages together.
May I ask where's published, please?
On medium.com.
Medium.com.
I write these for myself, not for other people. But it's titled Reinventing Societal Infrastructure with Technology. Okay. And my only criteria was a 50% improvement was not good enough. It had to be so large, hundreds of percent, that you needed a lot less resources to get all 7 billion people on the planet to the same level as the top 10% of the people enjoy. So 700 million people on the planet are rich in education, rich in healthcare access, rich in air conditioning and cars and roads and parks. Could you give that to 7 billion people without destroying the planet? And I care a lot about climate. Could you do it without 10 times the amount of steel or copper or cement or cars or building space, and hence the building efficiency exam? That was really, really exciting. So what I would say to you is there isn't an area that can't be innovated in a massive way. Let me take some unusual areas. A couple of years ago, about 5 years ago, I got interested in agriculture. We'll say, what do you innovate in agriculture? We started a company about 5 miles from here to have machine vision look at plants and using AI decide what was a weed and what was a crop. It could thin lettuce, it could weed cotton or corn, drive a tractor to the field at 4 miles per hour and kill everything that wasn't a plant. Now that seems cool, but not that impactful. Turns out 40% of all costs of a US farmer are chemicals they use to spray. So one, you could reduce 40% of their cost of agriculture, and you could eliminate herbicides on this planet. And to me, eliminating herbicides and chemicals from agriculture is so exciting, and it's a machine vision problem. It's an AI problem, it's a techie problem, not one people would think is open to them. John Deere came and made an attractive offer for the company, and the founder wanted to sell. We sold the company. We made a lot of money. I tried really hard to convince the founder to not sell because changing the world of chemicals in agriculture, big deal. And John Deere said to me, the president said to me, hey, this is really exciting for us because we sell a tractor to a farmer every 10, 20 years. Now we can get 40% of their revenue every year, recurring revenue. They thought they were going into the herbicides business, not the equipment business, and it's a software product.
Yeah.
Towed behind a tractor with a couple of cameras. Really exciting. So let me give you another radical example. I was giving you this robotic furniture example. Who would think furniture is open to tech? And about 4 or 5 years ago, this guy came to me and said, there's about 30 to 50% of this planet's land area is dedicated to agriculture, to animal husbandry. And he said, I want to eliminate animal husbandry from the planet. This is a Stanford professor. He said to me, I'll give up my tenure. He was a Harvard Hughes fellow, and he said, I'll give up my Harvard Hughes fellowship. But I want to create the perfect burger. This is Impossible Burger. It took me half an hour to say, we are investors. We signed a term sheet. Within a half an hour, we had a handshake. I said, I don't really care if it works or not. It's such an important problem. It's such a large part of the planet's area that it's worth attempting no matter what the probability of success. It's a very successful company. My point is the following, and I'm looking at 3D printing houses. Could you 3D print a house and reduce the amount of building material? Actually, with AI-based design, a field of design called generative design, you can subtract most of the materials that are not active. We build the steel beam this way because that's how we extrude steel. But if you could 3D print it, half the material or most of the material is not needed. Could you be creative? So if you can redo buildings, if you could redo furniture or hamburgers or agriculture, there isn't a place in society that can't be innovated in a big way. So my point, everything's open for innovation. That was my core message. And I get overly excited about this. I'm like a kid in a candy shop.
Good, good. You know, we're going to open it up to audience questions in just a minute, but I do have one question for you, and it's a big, you know, you've been an incredibly successful man, and you've been obviously a role model for most of the folks here in this audience. What would you, and many of them here are much younger than you and I. I'd be curious, what would you tell your 35 to 30-year-old self if you could write a letter to them and send it to yourself in the past? What did you learn, and what would you?
So a couple of things. What would I tell myself then, and what do I tell myself today? Those are two important questions. Yeah. One, I was always too arrogant. I always knew what I didn't know, but I sort of this arrogant view. I was smart, and I could do a lot. I think arrogance gets in the way. I'd also be much nicer to everybody around me. I was all about efficiency. If something's not efficient, pair it. I was too much the engineer, and that's a particularly important message. I'd be much nicer to people. You can do the same thing, just be a lot more patient with people. I wasn't patient. I was very impatient. And impatience is a good thing, but when it sort of shows off as you not paying attention to the feelings of people as much, I'd probably do a lot more of that. I'd be a lot less arrogant than I was. And I think that's the human side of us, the piece we tend to ignore, and you realize more and more as you get older. And I asked myself the question, what should I be doing different? And so somebody asked me recently, what do I struggle with the most? And I struggle with something, you know, I can talk to an audience like this quite easily. One-on-one with a 24-year-old, being relevant to the entrepreneur who's just starting out, has no experience, has no confidence. I try really hard to understand how they're thinking to stay relevant to that really young entrepreneur. Hey, Bipul and Dheeraj I can talk to. They're, you know, talk to somebody who's just fresh out of Stanford and is trying to be an entrepreneur and is pretty naive, it's so easy to get arrogant or dismissive so I struggle to be relevant to the new generation of really young entrepreneurs.
Well,
And I try hard.
this is just a comment that made me think about Munishi. We all know how Munishi is, just an amazingly energetic guy. But he shared with me the secret of being energetic at age 60, whatever it was. He said, even if you don't have heart disease, you can get a triple bypass. Am I right? Oh, quadruple. Okay, quadruple. Yes. Okay, good. Well, time for audience questions, and perhaps we can, you all have systems to enter your questions, and as you do, I'm going to see them coming up here, and when I do, I'm going to try and select some of them that make sense, given our conversation, and ask those questions. I'm looking here just so, I'll give you a minute or two to answer questions or put in questions. Okay, this is a very simple, practical question, and I'm going to ask this one. If I'm in my first meeting with a VC, what are the key things I need to convey to them in that first meeting?
I think the most important quality I look for, and every VC is different, and there's many successful styles of VC. I look for mostly how people think and how they respond to curveballs. Right? If you ask questions they haven't thought about, how do they respond? What quality of thinking? And this is, again, this issue of how dynamic, how fast a learner will they be, how will they think about a problem.
So that means essentially how well they're able to interact with you or anybody.
No,
on
it's
your
really
team.
the quality of the type of their thinking.
Type of thinking. Okay, got it. Okay.
By the way, the other piece, which is surprisingly missing in half my meetings, is enough ambition. People want to build nice companies, not awesome companies.
Yeah.
And I want to spend my time doing things that other people wouldn't do.
Yeah. So on that question, I mean, there's VCs and there's VCs, and I've known you for a long time, and you are absolutely, you swing for the fences, you look for the big technology plays, the changes in space, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot
By the way,
of
we have a space launch coming up in the next few days.
You are. But there's a lot
Our
of
own
VCs.
rocket engine, the first 3D printed rocket engine in the world.
Wow. Okay. Good.
All 3D.
But there
Designed
are a lot
from
of other
scratch.
VCs who don't do that. Many VCs don't necessarily look for the big plays. Perhaps they have a different viewpoint of how to make money for their partners, whatever. But what would you recommend for this audience for how they go about, in effect, selecting a VC or a set of VCs to approach based on their particular idea?
Let me start by something even more fundamental. There's a slide in the days of overhead projectors that I put together in 1986 that's still on our website now as a PowerPoint. And say, know what you want. And it's okay to set your own objectives. I think if I remember the slide, I haven't looked at it in maybe a decade or two, but it's called the entrepreneurial roller coaster, where the highs are high and the lows are low. It's still on our website. But I first wrote this up in 1986 in a talk I gave to the Churchill Club in 1986. I say, know what you want. And I think the language I use is, if you don't want to carry the American Express card because you want to be famous, that's a very different objective than you never want to balance your checkbook and you sort of have financial goals. Or if you just want to work with friends, those are all perfectly reasonable goals. And I find too many people sort of start off as entrepreneurs knowing what they want. I have a mission in life. My hamburger guy, he wanted to eliminate animal husbandry. He doesn't care one bit about how much money he makes. He doesn't care about dilution. He just cares about the mission. Okay? Mission is okay. Working with friends is okay. Making money is okay. Being famous is okay. But be clear what your objectives are internally and what makes you happy. And too many people get distracted by other people's expectations of them and not how they think about things internally. So that's the first thing. Once you know that, then I can answer your question.
Good.
Pick the VC who's compatible.
Okay.
You know, if you want to make a nice company, there's certain angels who will work with you. If you're mission-oriented, you know, the hamburger guy, even today, I'll make decisions that make us less money, but actually enhance the mission, because I care about the mission. Yeah. I wrote this document mostly because I care about the impact we can have. I also don't want 3x my money. Those startups are completely uninteresting. That's why even though we made $100 million on this company that was sold quickly, doing agriculture, AI, I was actually disappointed. I don't want to do 5x my money. I wanted to go build a really big multi-billion-dollar company. And so pick a VC who's compatible with your goals. And if you want to build a company and sell it for $200 million, perfectly great goal. I'm just not aligned with it. But there's many, many VCs who are. So pick somebody who's compatible. Now, I will say I don't ever call myself a VC. I've never called myself a venture capitalist. I always say my role in life is a venture assistant. I'm in the business of assisting entrepreneurs in building large visions and large technologies. Okay. So that's how I describe what I do. My goal is not to be your friend. My goal is not to be nice to you. My goal is not to leave you alone. My goal, just like with my children, is to push them to the limit of their greatness. That's what I like to do. I want to make you uncomfortable till you say, OK, this is my limit. And this is the best I can do, the biggest company I can build, the most radical innovation I can do.
Yeah. Good. So here's a question. This is it's a broad question, but it's interesting.
And by the way, I'll do that even if it doesn't make money if the mission is aligned.
Yeah, yeah, good. So this one, as an investor, how do you emotionally deal with failure? How do you deal, for example, how did you deal with your first significant failed investment?
First, I don't think of myself as an investor. Whenever I invest in something, I consider the money lost when I invest. Then there's only upside left. Right? I'll tell you a funny story. My first VC funding was my first company, a guy called Bob Sackman, who was at US Venture Partners, and he wrote me a check, a seed check. And I just, you know, I was used to the Indian environment, not somebody who'd just write me a check on a single sheet of paper. And I said, Bob, this is a great deal. If we win, we win. If we lose, you lose. Because the only thing I could possibly lose was my student loans. I didn't have anything else, just my student loans. I thought this was like the greatest deal in the world. It is asymmetric. As entrepreneurs, you're playing with other people's money. Till you build a big enough company, then you're taking risks with your own money because you're building value. Look, failures are largely unimportant in retrospect. Let me ask a question. How many people know the companies I've started? Myself.
Oh,
Name a company.
yeah. Well, that's good.
Of course, everybody knows that. Anybody else?
I heard.
Daisy, most people know because Daisy went public and it's on Wikipedia. Do you know, within 3 months of starting Sun, I started another company with McNeely as my co-founder. Anybody name that company? My point, failure does not matter. It failed. But nobody remembers it. Nobody ever brings it up. I'm the only one who ever brings it up. My point is, if you can afford failure, and that's an important criteria, and there's a talk on failure on my website. Being intelligent about the failures is really important. But if you can afford a failure, you shouldn't worry about the failure side. You should figure the upside. So I find, and one of the reasons sometimes I'm incompatible with other VCs is they reduce the risk of failure to the point where the consequences of success are inconsequential. They build these nice, mediocre companies. I'd much rather have a high probability of failure and a high consequence of success. That's just my personality. And so depending upon your objectives, pick a VC who matches your objectives.
Okay.
And that's really important.
Okay.
Let me give you an example. There was a board meeting I was in a few years ago, and they were trying to decide, and this was a later stage company, whether to raise another $50 million to a $50 million raise because they could raise it. At the board meeting, I said, and this is why I'm not popular at board meetings, I said, you know, it'd be okay to raise 50 if we agreed to waste 30 of it. And that was the exact language. And the rest of the board looked at me and said, what do you mean waste 30 of it? I said, I mean the following. Let's take 10 experiments that cost us $3 million. If they fail, we lose $3 million. If they succeed, we add 50 to 100% to our market cap. They ran those 10 experiments. One of those has more than doubled or tripled the market cap. So was it worth taking 5% of your market cap, spending 0.5% of your market cap on each of 10 experiments that had a low probability of success but high consequences of success? Yeah, because they could afford that failure. And that applies if you have $500,000 in the bank, take 50,000 of it, and run 10 experiments. If you have 50 million, take 10% of that and run it on 10 experiments. The point is relevant at any scale. And it's thinking experimentally, thinking you don't really know all the answers and discover. So I'm very sort of oriented towards learning. I call myself an experimentalist. I never know shit. I just experiment. I try things. I try things where failure you can ignore, but I wouldn't take the risk that kill my whole company. Unless the company is going under, then you want to take all these risks.
Yeah.
Right? So I sort of have unusual philosophies in this area.
Good. Okay. So I think we're getting close to the end, but I'm going to ask one question, which I'm sure a lot of
I talk too much.
No, it's great. Thank you very much for all of these inputs and answers. One question. I've got a few people who've asked the same question in different ways. How does somebody get to pitch their idea to you? How does somebody get to basically meet you or be able to pitch that idea to you?
Very simple.
Yeah.
My email address is vk@khoslaventures.com. I look at everything myself, believe it or not. And the more routine it is, the more likely I am to pass it to somebody, the more unusual it is, the more likely I'll spend more time on it. But I will say the following. Scanning a deck, scanning an email, I can tell how much thought was put into the email or the deck. And I will spend as much time as they put into the deck. If somebody is not thoughtful, I usually have pretty good metrics. I can scan a deck, and I can say, how thoughtful were they? Is it conveying information, or is it bullshit? When somebody says, world-class team, every deck says that. I don't need that. Tell me data. If you show me pretty pictures with a name, I know they didn't think about the team and what they're trying to say. What are the skill sets you have? If your team slide doesn't tell me something, I don't need to look at a pretty picture or a name. Doesn't tell me anything. Your name is Vikram, doesn't say anything. You worked at X or Y or had this thing. So being thoughtful about what you're trying to convey in every slide, every email, I can read that a mile away, and I'll appropriately respond.
All right. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all very much.
Let's give a hand to Vinod. Pleasure. Thank you. Okay, you have something.
Wow, that's very athletic. Thank you, Libby.
Thank you.
Token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Manishi.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Vinod. See you. Take care.
We're now moving to our second session, where we first had Vinod present us the pioneer generation's thought process. We now have the new generation, which most of you are, and all of you guys who are entrepreneurs and are doing startups today. I think seeing somebody in your own generation being very successful, we have two unicorns out here. There's Dheeraj Pandey of Nutanix, Bipul Sinha of Rubrix, and they're both IITians, IIT Kanpur and IIT Kharagpur. Is that right? Yeah, Kharagpur, okay. And we have Ravi Mhatre, the founding partner for Lightspeed Ventures. He's not an IITian, but he's an IITian lover. He loves IITians.
Honorary IITian.
Honorary, yeah. We'll get to that.
He loves invest, and he has invested in a number of IIT companies. Their resumes you will find on, again, if you look at the brochure, it is there. So we are going to give, in this discussion, the perspective of the new generation, to which a lot of you may relate, okay? So over to you, Ravi.
Yeah, Manishi, thank you. And good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here on a school night. Also just thank you to Vinod and Umang. I thought that was a some really interesting conversation, and so tough act to follow, but try to say something interesting here in the next hour.
The new generation has to do something.
Yeah, I know. We need to get going
And
here.
I see that Vinod is not here because he doesn't need to invest anymore in our companies. He's like, I don't need to sit here anymore.
Yeah, Vinod, thanks for actually leaving some opportunity for me with the next
he's right
generation of IITians. I needed to find a way to make my mark. So thank you for letting me have some of the younger guys here. But yeah, just a quick background. So Ravi Mhatre, and my sort of short story. My father actually is from Mumbai. He was an immigrant to this country. Came in the 50s to do his graduate education. Probably most of you had followed a path similar to that. I'm guessing after doing your undergrad at IIT. But it was a different time then, and he got a PhD in biochemistry. He worked in industry for a while as a basically as a research scientist in a lab, which were the jobs that were available if you were someone from India in this country in the 50s. But he was always someone who had that spark and creativity, and he wanted to he was a builder, and he wanted to really find a way to do something on his own. And he got a lucky break at one point. It it was a company here in Silicon Valley that, looked like it was going belly up. And I think, they thought, they asked him basically to take it over with the expectation that he would shut it down. But he really saw something in the technology, and, went out and found a way to, I remember he moved our family. I was in high school at the time, and he was, talking to my mom about just having to find a way to get money to make payroll. And I didn't really understand what all those things meant at the time. But, long story short, he ended up, basically being an entrepreneur, a little bit kind of got sort of slotted into this thing and had to learn everything about what it meant. I mean, he was, a foreigner in a strange land, had really everything to do to be an entrepreneur and then to kind of build a company to raise money. He didn't really have anybody to mentor him, and he figured all this stuff out. And I mean, I think, like Vinod, he just became super energized about doing that, and he spent, in the end, over 15 years doing it, and he grew this sort of small company that was a tech company in the life sciences space from a handful of people to, several thousand people and over $500 million in revenues. And, now that I've been in venture for, a couple of decades, I mean, the appreciation I have for the sort of the journey he went through is just, I mean, it was amazing to kind of see him do that. And, I ended up getting a double degree from Stanford, and then ended up, working in the tech industry. I've been in venture capital for 23 years, and, like to think I've spent, the better part of my life now working with entrepreneurs as, more in a support role, but, really trying to help people who are entrepreneurs, like, go through this amazing journey, which has ups and downs and a lot of kind of unanticipated surprises, both good and bad. And I actually was a founder myself in the venture capital industry. In 1999, started Lightspeed Ventures with 3 other co-founders, and have been working on funding enterprise companies mostly. I have not ventured out into some of these, really, I think, compelling new areas that Vinod talked about. My personal, sort of focus has always been broadly in companies that are trying to innovate in the enterprise landscape. And again, I think venture in some ways is a pretty local business, and you tend to, it goes both ways. You tend to work with people where you feel like you understand a little bit of what their personal journey is. It allows you to be, I think, more empathetic, and a lot of times, the hardest part about building a company, particularly I think for people in this audience, there is no doubt, I bet, everybody sitting in this room is smarter than me. And if it comes to probably designing a really disruptive architecture or engineering a new solution, I think, pound for pound, this room probably has any other group of people in the Valley, beat. On the other hand, the parts of the journey that can be hard are, how do I take some really interesting idea I have about a technical innovation and actually create a product that people want to buy? And more importantly, how do I, lead lots of people? Because in the end, building a successful company, it takes, it's a sort of a cast of thousands if you're successful. And so how do I become, someone who's an inspirational leader and get a lot of people to follow me? Those are things that have really nothing to do with designing a great, engineered solution, but they have everything to do with being successful as an entrepreneur. So, I think in the 23 years I've been investing, I've backed over 15 companies where the founders were basically IIT graduates, and so I feel like I've ended up and they've been a huge part of my success as an investor, working with people like that and helping them on the journey from starting as technical founders and ultimately, in many cases, becoming really successful leaders of businesses. So in terms of the panel tonight, Jyoti Bansal, some of you may know, unfortunately couldn't be here. He had a last-minute family emergency, but he was supposed to be here. I'll talk a little bit about him just because it's relevant. And then Dheeraj Pandey, who's founder and CEO of Nutanix, and Bipul Sinha, founder and CEO of Rubrik. I'll let them tell their stories, but just quickly on Jyoti, I was fortunate to meet him in 2008 and to be the first investor in the first company he started after being an engineer, called AppDynamics. And, I watched him transition from being a technical founder over 10 years into, really assuming the reins of taking on the CEO role and basically, not just building a great product, but really building a market, dominating company in a space that really never had a large dominant player before. 10 years into the journey, he decided it was time, to sell the company. It was the largest software M&A acquisition that's ever happened in enterprise in the last 20 years. It was the largest acquisition ever in Lightspeed's history. He, again, started the company himself, and post 10 years, he sold the company for $3.8 billion to Cisco. So that, was a pretty amazing journey, and I'm sorry he's not here to tell more about, the journey he took. He had an amazing amount of grit and determination, and it was something I felt really privileged to, be able to be a part of. And Dheeraj, I'll let you tell your story. I mean, I felt, was lucky enough to meet Dheeraj in 2010, and was one of the small number of early investors in Nutanix. That was 8 years ago now. And Bipul, I met originally when he joined Lightspeed, actually, as an investing partner. And it was, really fun to work with you, Bipul. I was so sorry to see you leave Lightspeed. And on the other hand, I ended up being, extremely fortunate to be the first investor in the company that he decided to start Rubrik. And I'm going to, let him tell you the story. So I guess with that, maybe the two of you, I'd just love to start it off in your own words. Just tell a little bit about your journey from basically being an IIT grad, to coming to the US, to probably, having your first job that you got hired to do as an engineer somewhere, to, deciding you were going to start a company to, to kind of where you are now. But I mean, it's kind of a remarkable story, and two people who, I mean, they're slightly different, but in many ways the same. So I'd love to just hear you guys talk a little bit about the journey.
Yeah, in fact, it's very surreal because, Bipul and I spent 4.5 years at Oracle together as well, which is where a lot of the impatience of the two wannabe entrepreneurs actually we fueled each other. So we'll get into some of that stuff from 2003 through 2007. But I came to the US. I was a PhD student at University of Texas, Austin, and I didn't know, just like Vinod was saying, I didn't know who I wanted to be, what I wanted to be. There were forks in the road. I said I could, get into being a management trainee at Unilever India, or I could actually end up doing a PhD. I ended up actually pursuing that path. I came to UT Austin, and then in the first summer, which is summer of '98, which is when the bubble was at its peak, I came to Oracle to intern in 1998 summer, and realized that this is the place to be, or at least the industry is a great place right now. Timing is everything. So I went back, I finished my master's, and decided to take a leave of absence from the university and never returned back after that. I worked at Trilogy in Austin, Texas for about a year, a little more than a year, and then just literally drove from Texas to Silicon Valley in 2000. I worked for other companies, for 2-3 companies, for 9 years, and then the impatience finally showed. And we'll talk more about how we fueled each other's impatience.
Wait, just back to one thing you said. You took a leave of absence. You weren't going to finish your PhD. I mean, you come to this country, and everything is about getting your education and your degree. I mean, how did you make that decision? And weren't your parents aghast?
Yeah, I mean, I've taken some of those decisions that have made them aghast, but they also, I've been fortunate to have parents who said, look, if you're doing something, we'll support you. And I'm sure Bipul is going to say the same thing about his as well, but my wife has been like that, I mean, you need a spouse who is an equal entrepreneur in all of this too, because, doing a company is not just an individual decision, it's a family decision at the end of the day. So, there's, I keep telling my wife that 50% of what we have achieved is really because of her, and I truly attribute this whole thing to the family itself. My parents, my spouse, I mean, our 3 children. In the last 7 years, we had 3 children as well, and they're all like really small. And when I'm here, they're sacrificing as well. So there's a ton that goes on in building a company as well. Go ahead.
It's kind of unreal to be here and be with Dheeraj. I met Dheeraj in 2003 in the lobby of Oracle when I went to fetch him to interview in my group. And from there, in many ways, he made me a better manager, better thinker, better entrepreneur, and very inspiring friendship that began in 2003. And in many ways, we kind of feed on each other. We tell each other things that are not going well with each other, and then but my journey is similar to Dheeraj in many ways. I grew up in Bihar, went to IIT Kharagpur to study EE. I come from a very modest background, and my goal of coming to the US was dollar.
It's good. You should be honest. Embrace it.
So the conversion number was so strong that I felt like that was the most honest way to take my family out of poverty. And I came to Atlanta to work as a software engineer in a company called American Megatrends. But I was very kind of unsettled in Atlanta because it felt like it was mid-90s, mid to late 90s, and everything was happening at Oracle, not in Silicon Valley. So I felt like I should be in Silicon Valley, not in Atlanta. I felt like I'm in the backwaters of technology. And came to the Bay Area in late 90s, and it was very humiliating experience because every party you go to, everyone talks about how they are becoming millionaires and billionaires. And, and you are the poorest guy on the block, and when your wife stops working and your cost of living doubles and your salary goes half, or the family income goes half. But lot of learnings along the way about, particularly at Oracle. Back then, I used to think that I'm spending too much time at a large company. Little did I realize that the people that I met along the way completely changed me and my perspective and my career, and a lot of thinking around products, market, business, talent, ambition, speed. Then I decided to kind of leave Oracle to do part-time MBA, and then after that, fortunate enough to get a chance in venture capital, and was in venture capital for several years before I decided to not sit on the sideline and clap to see other people run, but get into the fray and try it out. And here we are.
Yeah, in fact, I
was just going to say, I mean, yeah, both of you at some level, I mean, if you look at sort of the path you've taken, I mean, it's, and people will know, I mean, at this point, Nutanix is, I guess, over $1 billion run rate company, something like that.
Yeah, it's more than $1 billion. It's like $6-7 billion in valuation, but still a small company, very small.
But this is, I mean, this is a company, when it started, it was basically you and 2 other people. So, I mean, that's a radical kind of trajectory to have been on. And same, I mean, Bipul, company is younger, but I mean, it's a similar kind of thing. I mean, I think you're close to 1,000 people and, well into the hundreds of millions of revenues. And, it feels like not that long ago, when you and I were talking, I mean, there was basically you and 2 other founders. And I mean, 2 questions. One, like, how did you go from the notion of, I mean, you both had actually really good jobs before you decided to just say, I'm going to start my own company. And I'm curious what, in each of your cases, pushed you over the edge to say, all right, I'm doing it now, and this is it, and then you cut the cord. So maybe talk about that, and then the other thing is talk about maybe what surprised you the most in terms of something that was really hard that you just, you kind of had the background that you did. When you start a company, it is all on you to kind of be able to do everything that's required to build a great company, not just the product. So something that surprised you that was hard. So those 2 things I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think the impatience part was always there. Even when we were at Oracle, I mean, we used to have a common VP, Juan Loiza, and he would say, why do you both try to make such trouble at Oracle in terms of trying to go and shake things up and innovate and disrupt? Because the 2 of us would go on the last day and say, we have this 10,000 line project that we need to check in, and the code freeze is coming in the next week or so. Anyway, I think we always wanted to go and innovate, and obviously Oracle gave us a chance. We had a common manager who was also a very impatient guy that we learned a lot from as well. But I think that impatience finally was about going and doing something, making it better, improving things as well, and improving the family situation along the way as well. And I think that's the impatience that at least had me quit Oracle and then go and join a startup. So I took a baby step, just like he took a baby step by going and joining venture capital. I took a baby step and joined a startup, 10, 11 people. And then saw these founders from afar to realize that, look, I could also do this, and probably I could do this better as well. So I think that 2 years was this gestation period of an exercise in self-discovery, just getting to know myself a little bit more. So I'd actually recommend a lot of you, rather than just go from a big company to saying I'm either going to start or just stay there, is take the first baby step, because that first step of crawling before you walk and run could be equally useful to understand who are you, what's your identity, what are you good at, and things like that, really. And talking about the next thing you said about what's the hardest thing, I think in the last 8 years, because we're all good people, all of us here, we want to be good with people, but you realize that you have now seeded a baby in the company itself. It's a living, breathing being now. And it has a mission. It needs to be protected, nurtured, and it can't talk back to you when it's being neglected. So there's this thing about being liked versus being respected, because at the end of the day, when you grow into becoming a leader, you have to understand that you like being liked by people, but at some level you've got to be respected by people, because you've got to make some tough decisions along the way. And you've got to protect the mission, because that's equally important now, and as I said, it's a living, breathing being as well. And I think that's kind of the thing that at least myself have come to really realize, that you deal with people, you manage people, but then you also have to manage a product and design and brand and strategy and many of those things that don't talk back to you. So if they're suffering, somebody's got to go and protect them as well.
For me, this journey of going from an engineering manager at Oracle to venture capital, and really self-discovery about who you are, and can you look at business, and can you identify a value vector. So there was some discovery that went along the way that, okay, maybe I can see a business, we can make a sense of a business. But one thing that I always kind of think back is, am I at potential? I'm doing good, maybe going great, but am I at potential? Is this the highest expression that me or my life can have? And at some point, I realized that being a venture capitalist, I thought I was good at it, but I didn't feel like I was at potential as a human, at my potential as a human being. And I felt like the best way to identify your potential is to go out there, right? If you walk naked, you know about your figure. So you go out there and figure out what you're good at. Is it just me telling Dheeraj that do this, do that, or other entrepreneurs? Or do I really have something that I can apply and understand my own potential? So that was kind of the core driver of really going out there and doing self-expression. And it was a tough decision. I mean, I remember taking Radhika to Portugal and breaking the news there that I'm going to leave Lightspeed in the next 2-3 months. And she got a shock of her life, that what you do, there's a small subset of people do, of going after early stage companies and meeting entrepreneurs and helping them start companies. Why do you want to go from there to an unknown space? You don't know whether you're good or bad at it. And I thought that was the most interesting part. You go realize your own thing when you go into unknown. So that was the core driver of taking this story and pushing it out there to see how far it goes.
Yeah, I think so well said. Sometimes I even talk about this to employees about, if you think about just the potential of humans to go and say, the curiosity of knowing why should people have to go through South Africa to get from Asia to Europe if you could dig the Suez Canal, and eventually it's about that realization that, look, I want to go and build the Suez Canal, which everybody said can't be done because the levels of Mediterranean and Red Sea were different, Panama Canal and stuff like that. So it's about, going after seeking the unthinkable.
Well, maybe, yeah, on a related point in some of the questions that have come in here, how did you, that sounds great at a high level, but at some point you had to say, all right, I have this good job and now I'm going to go do this other thing. One, how did you get to the point where you thought you had a good enough idea and Should that idea be something where, you know, I mean, I have a personal view, it should be something where you have an unfair advantage based on work you've absolutely done so that you don't go off and you know, really try to learn everything about a space. It's a high chance of failure that you do that. So how did you get the idea, and like just talk about that, because I think your backgrounds are really very similar probably to a lot of the people in the audience, and if they're thinking about a startup, is it really a blue sky thing, or how do you get to that point where it's like, hey, I found this thing, and like if I do it, it could be the Suez Canal, and not just, you know, I don't know, a couple of footsteps on the way to the Suez Canal.
Well, I mean, one thing, and I'm sure all of us are very rational, analytical thinkers because we have one thing in hand, which is our current jobs, well-paying jobs, great degrees from universities and things. So that one thing in hand makes us conservative as well because we're not good at taking risks then because you have too much to lose now because, you know, you actually have this bird in hand. And one thing I've always said, continue to say this on an everyday basis, every week basis as we make tougher decisions in running the company is you've got to do a scenario plan. As long as you think of the worst case, and the worst is not bad enough, you basically take this step. So everybody says it was an irrational decision. To me, I think nothing is irrational. The rationality behind it, that the worst case was not bad enough. So you go in. So I think going back to quitting a job and first of all, you don't have an idea. And Vinod said it right, that it's not like you actually have something fleshed out. You know, the process of going through that discovery of the idea itself takes about a year or more.
A year after you start your company.
Yeah, and it keeps morphing. It keeps morphing, you know, because what you thought was a great idea, in a 10-mile radius, there are 10 other people who are thinking about the same thing. The question is, who actually took the step of investing time and saying, I'm going to leave the risk behind and just jump and start doing it?
Okay, so that's an important point. You're saying it's not that you need to sort of have some idea where it's just clear that nobody else has thought about it, but you should have an idea. If it's a good idea, the chances are that there definitely are other smart people thinking about it, but you got to believe based on your background and what you think you can go do, that you can come in first.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's a directional thing, you know. Ideas are not like it's a laser sharp thing. Directionally, you don't want to do something in, let's say, infrastructure, it's B2B, and then you know that you have a few things going for you. Like, one of the things I always thought I had was empathy. And it has helped me be a good product manager. You know, I talk about this all the time, that look, there's only two things we manage, humans or machines. So when you think about human-machine combinations, there are three combinations, you know, human-machine interface, machine-machine interface, and human-human interface. You know? So at some level, when you're thinking about products, which is beyond code, it's like, how do you think of reducing friction in all these three interfaces? You know? So human-machine interface is about design. Like, you know, if you were to really put yourself in the shoes of the end user, can you think about reducing the number of clicks it takes to get things going? You know, that's at the core of most popular products, is about reducing friction. And I thought I was good at empathy, so I said I can get in the shoes of the other side. I thought I was a visual thinker as well. I visually think a lot. So I think that gave me that extra courage to say, look, I think I can really think about human-machine interaction in the interface itself. Machine and machine, I think I learned along the way the value of APIs and how machines need to interact with machines and things like that. But the human-human piece, which has become an even more important part of this, running this company, how do you reduce friction between humans and humans? Because as you get, we have like 3,500 people in the company now, and when you get that collection of people, that sea of humanity, you will get into conflicts. You resolve conflicts, you make judgments, things like that. So I think a lot of that comes down to empathy itself, you know, and I'm sure a lot of you in this crowd actually do believe in your empathy of what does it mean to get in the shoes of other people, you know.
So what about you, Bipul? Talk a little bit about, the idea and either how you came to it, or then when you left, how you refined it, or...
So as Dheeraj said, that there is no straight path of an idea. It's about connecting dots. You are meeting, you are talking, you are like thinking, and you, through this process, few things bubble up. And when things bubble up, human tendency typically is to kind of say no to it and move on. What we tried to do was, when one of these things bubbled up, I said that I cannot have my VC hat on it, because as an Italian philosopher actually once said that human minds have two states, a state of intellect and a state of will. As a venture capitalist, you have a state of intellect where you are pessimistic. You want to see the downside. You always look at what could go wrong. And as an entrepreneur, you are in the state of will, because you want to execute, you want to conquer the world, you are looking at the upside. And so when the ideas bubble up, I used to always think that what is the upside here versus what could go wrong. So one of the hardest thing I had to do was to switch that mindset, rather than, hey, others jump in or something could fail, versus can we shape this into a big thing. And it took us like roughly 6 months of iterating and discussing and talking and validating to kind of shape the idea. So the starting point is that if you connect dots and something bubbles up, don't just drop it, follow through. And that perseverance that you need for 5, 6, 12 months, that's what makes an idea from idea to a business. And then you take that seed thought, and then you layer a business design on it. And that takes another year. So it's like a 2-year journey before you can touch the market.
You know, there's some related questions here I want to just touch on, the audience. Somebody asked, how did you both get your first customers? And I mean, I guess it's related to the idea and the product, but maybe, when you don't have anybody using the product, how do you go about getting first customers? Or first people outside the 4 walls, I guess, to even spend time with whatever it is you're doing? Why would they?
I mean, hustle has no formula. At the end of the day, jugaad, the word that we use is jugaad in Hindi. It's like there's no formula for it. What you've got, as Bipul said, it's the will that you have to keep tinkering. And by the way, one thing you'll realize, and especially as you start to gauge people better, they're talkers and they're walkers. The talkers will talk. They're like, oh, just go do 2 more features and we'll talk again, and I'm sure I'm going to buy this thing. And the walkers in the early days, they're themselves tinkerers. They tinker. They like tinkering. They believe that tinkering will result in their promotion. It will give them something. So being able to recognize the tinkerer is at the core, just like it is to recognize the first employee or the first 10 employees who are risk takers. They want to tinker with their careers and things like that. I think you need to have a little bit of a taste for a tinkerer who is going to be, walking the walk and give you the first $50,000. And then, of course, from there, the word of mouth and how you really make that into a virtuous cycle comes together.
What about you, Bipul?
So I'm very passionate about selling and marketing and just go-to-market of the business, because that's when you start to interact with the market, that's when you know that you have something or not. So what we did was, within 4 months of starting the company, I started to look for an inside salesperson who would cold call customer and line it up for us, or line them up for us. And then I would go and pitch to the customer. We had no product. I mean, 4 months into it, we had people writing a bunch of code, but no real product, or nothing that we can test on. But we would pitch the customer as if we are selling the product. And then we came up with another idea that turned out to be, that was like a little bit counterintuitive, but turned out to be a good idea, was we created this 1-page document called Early Access Program Contract. And we'll pitch the idea, and if they show interest, we would send them this contract saying, pay us $3,000 and wait for 6 months to get this beta product that we're going to ship to you next year. And everybody thought that we were crazy, because number one, you don't have a product. Number two, $3,000. Number three, they have to take this contract and get their procurement or some other guys to sign it. But it turned out what Dheeraj said about tinkerers, it actually separated tinkerers from talkers. And because it was something concrete that they had to take action on. Writing $3,000 check and getting it signed by their bosses or procurement or whoever. This led us to actually have 22 beta sites. Of course, we hired a head of sales who contributed to this, but we stuck to this process. And within 15 months of founding the company, we got $50,000 PO from one of the alpha customers that we shipped based on the EAP program. So it's all about like having a focused way to disqualify people. The job is not to qualify people, job is to disqualify people. Among a lot of disqualified, if you find somebody who's really qualified, you need just one or two or three. You just have one first customer. That's how you go.
The other thing, my experience is that when you talk to a bunch of these people, most of them are laggards or they're late majority. They are in this state of intellect. So they'll say, don't do it. And we heard 90% of the people we talked to earlier and said, don't do it, science project.
Doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah. There's different refresh cycles, different budgets, different teams. You're trying to bring them together. So you need to have this irrational bias for the idea as well, because it's going to take some, and I say this to people that don't take customer feedback until the product is 1.0. Because and once you go to 0.9 and 1.0, then 1.1 requires customer feedback, 1.2 requires customer feedback, because now you're really iterating with the customer on the 1.1, 1.2. Maybe to go from 1.2 to 2.0 again, you can't ask the customer of what do they need. Because this is a very cliched thing to say, but you'll feel this every day. What Henry Ford said, if you ask the customers what do they need, they'll say faster horses. Yeah. As opposed to, oh, there's a thing called a car as well. And we face this every year, like we went from doing hyperconvergence to doing hypervisors. We took VMware head on when we were like a measly tiny company, and most people said the world doesn't need yet another hypervisor and compute virtualization layer and things like that. We're going through cloud right now, so the world doesn't need another cloud provider. So I think you need to have a point of view. You need to know what you're not going to be, because obviously you can't build a cheaper, faster mousetrap. I think changing the turf based on the naysayers, because the naysayers need to give you that much more strength to say, look, I know that they're saying don't play on the incumbent's turf. I didn't hear don't do it. What I heard was all they're saying is don't play on the incumbent's turf, because you can't. It's a 10-year-old turf. You have to change the turf, change the game, and then you probably have a chance to really play it.
So it sounds like, some of the takeaways, it's just you have to be a hustler. And these are not the things they teach you in school. And it's a little bit of like know yourself. You can't be shy. You have to have enough conviction in what you're doing and a thick skin, because in the early days, 9 out of the 10 people will tell you no. And it's a game of, at some level, it's one level being focused on what you're doing, and then a game of numbers and just going out there and really engaging with a lot of people and finding the people who are going to align with what you're doing.
Absolutely. Like Elon Musk, nobody invested in him. He had to put his own money, and now he's God. It's like in a matter of 8 years, 10 years, something like that.
Well, and I remember in the early days, it was not just the customers. I think Lightspeed is pretty deep in infrastructure, and somehow, I guess had enough of the tinkerer mindset. But I remember that, you talked to a lot of investors who and the conventional wisdom at the time was that if you built something that looked like this, it would not work. Technically, it might not work well because the CPUs didn't have enough compute power, and in terms of the mindset of people in these organizations, it's just the easy answer is sort of like the old days of like nobody gets fired for buying IBM. The easy answer was just to say it won't work, and so you had to have a thick skin and just wade through a lot of that.
Absolutely.
And it is that fine balance. As an investor, I would say it's the fine balance. When we see entrepreneurs, you need to have that ability to keep going, and on the other hand. And you guys, I want you to comment now on this. Is really a little more about I think someone asked, Vinod talked a little bit about what, maybe the value you get out of VCs. But I want you to talk a little bit about your experiences with VCs, because I think VCs are a little bit programmed to say, how do I see all the ways that something can fail? Because it's a little bit of a test. If at the end of the day you go through that whole list and nothing really, and you can't check the box anywhere, then those are the rare times where in your mind you say, okay, I'm going to proceed because all my negativity didn't kind of squash the idea. But I guess it's a little bit of the balance. You have to keep going in the face of a lot of people probably saying no and being negative on what you're doing. But at the same time, you have to be listening enough, because if 100% of the people say no and you just keep going, you could wake up in 3 or 4 years and not have made any progress. So it's a little bit of a balance. And maybe, I'd just be curious your perspective as you met more with VCs who, are probably predisposed to give you all the reasons why something can't work. I mean, how do you determine where what's a good way to kind of have a relationship where you can get value when you're engaging with VCs more than customers?
You want to start?
That.
Talk?
Sure.
You have talk as yourself, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
How valuable I
Conversation with
was to
yourself.
the entrepreneurs, and then some.
My personal experience has been that if you look at like a sample of 100 VCs in the valley, probably 90 of them don't know what they're doing. Pretty much don't know what they're doing.
They're money managers.
They're calling their friends and friend's friend and another's friend and trying to kind of get social proof on an idea. That, hey, do you look at this idea? What do you think about this? Do you agree with? So instead of having like this kind of own first principle thinking, they're trying to validate the idea. And that's the reason majority of them fail. Because when you go talk to them, here is my test. When you go talk to a VC, if they ask you to go talk to this expert that they know, that's the clear signal that they don't know what they're doing. and majority of people do that. So when I became VC, my first thing was that if I don't understand your business, then I'll not invest in your business. Because if I don't understand it, then I'll sit with you and I'll give you all kinds of wrong advice. And this is a marriage without the prospect of divorce. So till your company has a conclusion, you have a bad person sitting with you, because this person has no idea what you do and give you all kinds of generic bad advice. So that was my test, that if I'm going to interact with someone, do they fundamentally understand what I'm talking about or what I do? So that's number one. And when the person understands what I do, then I'll have comfort in taking feedback from them, even if they don't agree with my own ideas or my own thought process about the market. Because one thing that as an entrepreneur I worry about is that if I'm going on the left side, is there someone who can give me at least a broader landscape saying that, hey, this is okay, but think about these other things as well. And if I don't trust the person who is closest to me on this journey, then this thing breaks apart. And so that was my number one criteria, that do they fundamentally understand the business. And Ravi was our first investor. I worked with Ravi. Ravi brought me into Lightspeed. And when I told Ravi that I'm leaving Lightspeed to go start a new company, and he said, Bipul, we want to discuss and look at it. And I said, I have 3 other founders, so we'll have 1 week of decision making, because it's not something that I can linger on, because it's a biased thing to do, because I'm a partner here, because my co-founder would like to kind of do a broader conversation.
I mean, shop it around.
Yeah, broader conversation. and I had we prepared a pitch deck. I sat with Ravi and we did 1 pitch, and he never let me get out of the room. So that understanding of market dynamics, what could create disruptive value, and ability to kind of see not like a straight line path, to really understand what is a new perspective on the market, makes all the difference. And if you don't have a partner who can think that way, then you are in a world of hurt, because it's only half of your time is going to go fixing the friction of ideas versus going and building the company.
Yeah, so well said. I mean, the word partner is actually so important, because you're going to deal with them on a regular basis. But for me, just like he said about his test, my test was about long-term greed. I have a bias for long-term greed, which is the reason why we keep doing all these crazy things in Nutanix as well. And I remember when we talked to you, like in an hour or 2 hours, there was this thing this chemistry that, oh yeah, let's figure out this something disruptive. You had some overlapping portfolio investments in some of the other companies. Lightspeed obviously had a lot of enterprise stuff going, but in a matter of weeks, we figured out that there was some long-term greed. I mean, you wrote a $10 million check without even thinking about valuation a lot and stuff like that. I mean, by the way, Vinod was very similar. It was very valuation agnostic. Once you like something, you love it, you're like, don't worry about the last 1%, 2% kind of stuff, you know. Don't optimize the short term, go optimize the long term, make the pie bigger. And I think our relationship in the last 8 years, I mean, we just have, as the company has morphed, so has our role in the company, so has, I mean, I looked at you as an investor, I looked at the board member, now you're a company builder. Now we want to go take the big guys head on. It's like every year or 2 years, we've actually transcended a lot of naysayers to go do bigger and better things. But at the end of it all, one thing that I believe, in general about my board, I think they've made me more authentic. Because sometimes you can be full of yourself, and every day, and I use the word authentic in a very sort of formulaic way. There's a great author who I've come to really respect, Mike Robbins, and he talks about authenticity. Folks should read his book. It's called Be Yourself, because everyone else has been taken. And it's a great read. It just talks about what does it mean to be authentic, because in front of a board, and this is one of the things I learned along the way, that you have to be somewhat vulnerable as well. And in some sense, Vinod was talking about like you don't know everything, is a very positive word called vulnerability, which the board actually keeps reminding about that, look, the more vulnerable you are, the more you deal with us and look at us partners. It's not us versus them. It's all us on the table. You bring the bad stuff, the bad news out. The better this chemistry will actually be, actually. So I think I've looked at it that way, and I think it just becomes a virtuous cycle as opposed to them and us, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll exclude myself from this, but my view is that a good investor, they may be really sort of trying to find all the negatives for why an idea doesn't work. But I mean, I know the philosophy we have at Lightspeed is on the other, once your money's in, you'll be able to sort of pull it back. A marriage without the prospect of divorce. So at some level, if you are meeting investors at the formative stages of your business, you do want people where you believe that the culture of the firm it's a bit of a flip. Once you're in, you can't exit back the way you came. So you have to have a mindset, even though you're an investor and you are a support player in the overall context of the company, that the path is to be fully and firmly and permanently committed to success as the path forward. And I think when you have that mindset, then the value that a good early stage investor can bring is, the fact that they hopefully have broad reach, and so can bring a lot of market intelligence. They do have this more kind of hard-edged, cynical view of all the things that could go wrong. And a good investor is not going to impose that negativity on you, but they can be a tremendous source of, being able to be smarter than the sort of the collective wisdom of what the platform sees, smarter than, any individual can be, any individual company can be. I think they can be, a good investor should be, sort of a foil, and in the right way, it's not a blocker to, and it only works if there's trust and authenticity in the relationship both ways, but that you can basically bring a lot of insight to the table that maybe, sort of scary things to hear, or not the things that a company would want to hear, but a relationship where you get that force multiplier of all of that around the table can really, it just helps, because when you're a startup, you're sort of small and you're in a sea of all kinds of activity and things that are going on. And a good investor at the early stage can be like a big brother, that it just brings a lot of the things you get when you're bigger and have more scale into the room, and you have that accessible as a very small company to help you, navigate and make good decisions.
Also, one of the things that, and some of you will actually start companies, I hope all of you do, and I'm sure Bipul struggles with this every day as well. It's like, how do you manage a a series of paradoxes, because as the company grows, you have to manage tons of opposites, paradoxes, like tough love. Like, what does it mean to have tough love? What does it mean to have a paranoid optimism? Because there's a left brain that needs to be paranoid. The right brain says you've got to be optimistic. The good VCs, I mean, you're not just an early stage investor anymore in our company. We are a public company for the last year and a half. You have hundreds of millions still invested in Nutanix. You're not thinking about an early stage investor. You're saying, what does it mean for us to be a leader and for all of us to transform ourselves to become better leaders every day? And it's these kind of things that you talk to your, sort of board members that makes you a better person and a more fearless person, more vulnerable person, and so on.
There's a question here that it was actually directed to you, Bipul, but I think we should all talk about it. A question for Bipul. What I discovered when I pitched a VC, oh no, sorry, I'll get to that one, but no, there was another question for you, Bipul, here. Oh, Bipul, getting prospects might have been, sorry, I'll get to the other question I asked. Getting prospects might have been easier with your level of connections. How do you suggest people with no connections find prospective customers? And I'll just comment first that as a VC, if you want to be an entrepreneur, wrong question to ask. And I feel like both of you have said it in your own ways. You have to believe that you're going to be successful, and whatever your start point is, you can make it happen. But I don't know what would.
This is a good question. So you would think that as a venture guy going out and starting business, you have a bunch of connection, number of people you know, and number of potentially CIOs you have met in variety of events. Little did I know that being a VC is something that will be negative out there. Because number one, a lot of people feel like you are out of touch with realities. So when you talk to people, they look at you as if like, why are you doing this? And you should, hustling is not your job. So it took 5-6 months and many discussion for me to make people realize that I'm in this for real. It's not that just a hobby that I'm out there for 6 months and I'll go away. Because I'd meet customers or prospects and they will say that maybe you're interested in this for 6 months and your mind will change and you'll go back to Lightspeed, and then what will happen to my company? So in some ways it was negative. And also as a venture guy, you go talk to VP of sales or CIOs, but these are not the people who you'll hire, because you'll hire a rep that you have never talked to most probably in your career, and you have not talked to a system administrator who is your technical buyer. So the effort is the same, because these journeys, like starting companies and building companies, we are a very young company. We are not even 4-year-old company. We are close to 800 people. But we are very young companies, and these journeys are like 20, 30-year journeys. And you are very early stage of that journey. And you have to realize that you have to pay the tuition, you have to pay the toll to be able to walk that journey. And the toll is, can you really put yourself out there and with sheer force of will convince people to take a chance on you? Nobody buys technology from a young company. They buy you. They buy your commitment. They buy your passion. They buy your drive to go out there and do something different. And what is great about our country is you go anywhere in the country, from Kentucky to Oklahoma, people want to give a striver a chance. So if you go out there and you strive and you convince people that you are here to stay, you'll do whatever it takes to make them successful, and their success is your success. I mean, you'll get dozens of customers, not just one or two.
I couldn't agree more. And Lightspeed, because we do a lot of interviews, we have a CIO program with hundreds of CIOs of mid and large companies. And what I realized, because I think we open a lot of doors to maybe first meeting, those connections. And by the way, if you start an early stage company in enterprise, get mentors or maybe angel investors or a VC who you think can have all the connections will do is maybe open that door crack and you can sit down with them. But what Bipul just said, that's the reality of how these early, basically these early engagements happen. People are basically making a bet on you. And you know, if you're determined enough, you may not have any connections, and whether you have a VC or an angel to open the door, you know what, if you're smart, you can get on LinkedIn. In today's day and age, there are so many ways, if you have the determination, to get to the people. And they'll give you a listen if you really, you know, are determined, and then you're compelling in what you say. You know, I want to ask sort of a question, and I think people in the audience may not, nobody asked it, but I think you might be interested. And both of you, I've seen you go through it. This is the question more about, I mean, you both culturally, you know, came from India here, were trained, you know, in more of a technical or an engineering discipline. I mean, that was your path through life. You start a company, I mean, and this is sort of great technical founders can design, you know, really transformational architectures. Great entrepreneurs, I think, can envision and build like a product that can really be different. Great CEOs and leaders are the people who build transformational companies, these companies that can endure and go public. And both of you have made basically those evolutions and are really now sort of strong leaders and CEOs. But the very first time you had to, you know, you were sort of IITian technical product people, and you know, I think with you, Dheeraj, the first person I saw you do it with was a person in marketing who, you know, had been at a very successful appliance company that went public and was, I think, had a $10 billion market cap. And this individual, you know, you spent a long time trying to recruit that person to come to Nutanix, which, you know, I think he looked at it as, you know, like you should be working for him, and he was not, you know, of Indian origin, and you know. And you had to find a way to get him to come buy into you and this kind of group of, there were a lot of actually Indians in the company who were coding away. And it's a little bit, how did you step beyond the kind of persona that was your life path and basically convince this person from a very different background that they should follow you? And Bipul, with you, it was a person, I mean, I'll anonymize it, but he's sort of a very tall individual, and he's a swimmer, an athlete. He grew up in this country. I mean, I think his background couldn't be more different from yours, and you both basically had to, in some way, sort of overcome the catch-22 of getting people like that to kind of come along with you. I mean, just talk about how you did it, or what it felt like trying to do that for the first time.
Yeah. Well, for one, you first shed this, you know, stereotype, a moniker that, you know, you are an Indian, because at the end of the day, you're an entrepreneur. By the way, Condoleezza Rice says this. She's a very good mentor of mine, like really close. And people talk about like women empowerment to her, and she's like, the first thing you got to do is stop thinking that you're a woman, you know, and then everything else will actually be easy, actually, you know. And the same thing was true for me as well. I didn't have to think that I came from a different country. Obviously, there was a level of hunger because, you know, just like him, he'd gone through a background which was not the most affluent one, and I think there was this sort of immigrant hunger to go and do something, and that my family had never seen and done. I did have a cousin that both of us looked up to, actually. You know, so I had a cousin who sold his company called Nextag for $1.3 billion, and it was very close to me. He was like my maternal cousin and so on. So we used to look up to him, like, you know, how do we be that and stuff like that as well. But I think, coming to your question, I think you need to shed that stereotype, the moniker itself, and then things come easy. There's no substitute to persistence and tenacity, and there's always a plan B that you keep thinking about, because, you know, many of these people, just like customers, because early employees are like customers, you know, many of them early on might not believe in your product, which is you and the company, not just the product, but you as a product. And maybe a year or 2 years later, they'll come back and say, you know, I passed on this and I should have been doing this and so on. So I think there's no substitute to tenacity, persistence, and saying that you're first among equals. I mean, by the way, all of us were high school toppers. Think about it, all of us. You know, whosoever went to IIT was a high school topper. They were the king of the hill. They come to IITs and they realize it's a great leveler, because everybody's a school topper. And, you know, all of a sudden, and by the way, many of us gave up after 1 or 2 semesters to say, I'm not going to compete in this rat race. It was that hard actually to say, look, grades and everything else. But I think we have to go back to that experience and realize that Silicon Valley is exactly that. It's a bunch of first among equals. Everybody's a school topper. How do you survive, and then how do you thrive, actually? And probably taking a step back to say how you did it back then and what you should have done differently back then to not break your confidence, because a lot of people's confidence was broken in the first 2 semesters at IIT, actually. They said, I'm not going to go after my grades anymore or something like that. I think Silicon Valley is exactly that. It tests your mettle, and you got to be tenacious about it, actually.
I mean, well said. On the similar line, the way I think about business, people, myself, it's all about unfair advantage. And many people go to IIT, many people go to Wharton, many people become good engineers. But you have to fundamentally look at your life and say that what makes you unique? And if you look at that, you look at your life experiences, look at yourself and say, what makes me unique? And if you just focus on what makes you unique, and you go out there and be in a very open way, share your own thoughts. Because a lot of time, we are prisoners of our own imagination. We actually negotiate with ourselves, we put limit on ourselves. So if you go out there and freely express who you are, then you can connect with anyone. I'll give you an example. So about 5-6 months ago, Kevin Durant is one of our investors in our company, and we invited to an event in Vegas, and after that I had a dinner with him. I sat next to him. I've never saw any of his game. I don't know anything about basketball, and I was told that you should go watch some of his game before you go out dinner with him. I said that's not me, right? If I try to be something that I'm not, then I'm not unique. So I sat next to him, and first thing said, dude, I don't know anything you do, but you probably don't know anything I do, so let's talk about each other's life.
And a great partnership was born.
And we had 30 minutes of an amazing discussion about who we are, where we come from, what are our individual aspirations, where are the common threads in each other's lives. Obviously, he is much more successful and well-known than I am, but there are some common threads, right? Where you grow up, how you think about the world, what you want to do, where your passions are, how do you want to utilize your own resources, in his case, fame, in my case, whatever little ways I can help people start companies, etc. So it's all about like your authentic self. And if you are confident and comfortable in your own skin, and if you're willing to go out there and talk about your story, you can go hire great people, because people are not looking at the most smart looking person or the most knowledgeable person or this Renaissance man. They are looking for someone that they can relate to. They are looking for someone who can validate them. They are looking for someone who will give them amazing opportunities to be their best self. And if you just think about how do you become your own best self, or at least try to be your own best self, then you attract people. And it's all about how comfortable you are with yourself.
I mean, I think these great points. I mean, and frankly, as an investor, I think, Vinod had answered this too, about what do we look for in the people that, we're going to invest in. Some of this is like, you have to shed the image of, the self-image of like, I'm, come from this group and background. Because I have met people, in some ways, because they can't shed that self-image, it becomes self-limiting. You have to think, go through, read some books on, self-discovery and leadership, and you really kind of have to figure yourself out, and who you are as a person is not, it's not like the educational credential you have or the this or the that. It's really, you've walked a path in life, you learn about, who you are authentically, the things you're good at, how you can, operate in a way that plays to your strengths and gives you unfair advantage. And when we are, meeting entrepreneurs, I mean, when I met you, Dheeraj, I mean, when there is nothing except an idea and a person or two talking to you about the idea. A lot of times what we're trying to understand is less, the kind of resume and the credentials or, what someone's trying to tell you about how smart they are. And it is more this notion of, okay, who is this person? And, everybody's different, but we're trying to figure out, do they have some core way that they, their path, the way that they've been successful in life? And is that the kind of person? Do we think if we worked with that kind of person, we could take whatever their authentic way of being successful is and then, work with them to then allow them to be a really effective business leader, not just a technical founder? And so it's, for every person it's different, but it does start with like shed the notion of like I'm, a person from this one sort of specific background and become, whatever, your best version of yourself. And there is a little bit of like also, embrace that you're here and this is as much, I mean, it's what I think we all probably love about Silicon Valley. It's a place where people look past, maybe the surface thing, and people are more predisposed. They're trying to understand you in terms of your true merits, and you should always have that idea in your head of what you're communicating to people. I mean, these are qualitative things, but really important. If you do a startup and you really want to build a company, then you have to. These are things you will learn, and you will either be really thoughtful about them, or if you're not, they're going to kind of surprise you in a negative way when you're not able to like hire that great VP of sales who's going to help you get the first 30 customers, or you're wondering why when you know that you have the best architecture and you just can't get that person who was head of product at Google to come like help you really polish it and make it shine. I mean, these are the things that if you do figure them out about yourself are going to help you, turn the tide early on and really build a great team. I want to touch on, this is more of a tactical thing, but a number of people have asked the questions about, I mean, they cluster around like, hey, should I do a company? I mean, how did you think about if your personal finances aren't strong, if you, are on an H-1B visa? I mean, sort of the tactical things, is there like, if you start a company and your personal finances aren't robust and you're on on an H-1B, I mean, is it, because I think you Dheeraj, went through that, right? I mean, just talk a little bit about like, because sometimes it's like you should start a company in a pure sense when you think the time is right, but what about these real issues?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and you'll see this, people repeat this often, the best companies, the most iconic companies that started from the ashes of recession. It's, I mean, 2009, 1992, 2002, these are the times when most of the companies who became large over time got started. And there's a reasoning behind it, by the way, because by the time your product is ready, which takes 2 to 3 years, the pent-up demand actually opens up because, obviously it doesn't take more than 6 to 9 months for the worst recession to recover. And by the time the buyer is back, your product is ready, the buyer is back, and boom, you actually hit this hockey stick. So, it's not about the fact that, oh, there's recession, therefore I should actually stay. And by the way, those are the people who are taking the biggest risk because there might not be a job after 12 months, when you think about your worst case. So, yeah, that's what we did. In 2009, the economy was barely recovering.
And I don't think all of you had permanent
residency. I mean, Ajit didn't have one, but I had
write a letter for him.
Yeah, we had to write a letter for him. I mean, I didn't have a lot of money in the bank, actually, but I knew that in the next year or two, if nothing worked out, then I could always go back to doing a job. And the one thing I knew, and this is something that all of you probably should realize, the worst recession has not lasted more than 9 months when it comes to technical jobs itself. So the worst that you're looking at is 12 months of something. So if you have 12 months of savings, you're probably, okay quitting a job and doing something. We did some analysis on this at Nutanix to understand recovery from recessions and things like that. 9 months, So I think it's not about how much money you have in the bank. I mean, there was a time when I even asked my cousin, should I postpone my family, having kids? And, he said something that was really telling and something I used to exchange with Bipul as well back in the day in 2009 actually, 2010. About should we postpone having a family and like having kids, and he said something really unique, and he's like, look, I would have been a better entrepreneur if I had a family and I became a father, because your children will make you more patient, that you can be a better entrepreneur. So, had all our children in the last 7 years. And I think that when I think about them, I mean, I teach my son about less is more. And that helps me be a better product manager. Because obviously there's all this thing about, oh, you just keep doing more. And when I teach him less is more, I come back to office and I say less is more, you know. So in many which ways, kids actually make you better entrepreneurs as well. You know.
I have a point on this topic. So a lot of time when you want to start something, you always see hurdles. You want to have H1B, market, will I have a job or not have a job? About when I was at Oracle, and Dheeraj and I used to talk a lot about, are we limited to by Oracle, or is this our job? Are we going to wait 6, 7 years to become a vice president? And we thought at that time that's too long a time to actually wait. 7 years, God knows what will happen to us and the world. So it was too long to wait. So there was a realization that I personally went through, where I used to think that my existence and my job and my life is all because of Oracle. And then back in 2005, a day I realized that it's not because of Oracle, it's because of me that everything else around me exists. So this perspective change that you don't exist because of the world exists because of you. And as you take that perspective, all of you went to IIT. If you don't get a job in America, then half of the Americans are not working or more. So the risk about job or H1 or all of these things are really in our mind. If you take the perspective that world exists because of you and you can go out there and put yourself out there and do your best effort. If it doesn't work, something else will. I mean, job is the smallest thing. Again, we try to be prisoners of our own imagination.
If we have time, I got one last question that I think would be interesting to the audience. There are questions around co-founders, and one is sort of and I think it's if people think that maybe they could be part of a starting team, but they don't have all of the skills, how do you find co-founders? And then I thought it was another interesting, because you both had co-founders. How did you decide who would be the CEO? So I mean, just talk a little bit about that. I think those are interesting questions, because if you're sort of a person want to start something off, it's probably something.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are people who are patient with people, and there are people who are not as patient with people, and that's probably a good test for, you know, because there's a lot of respect that you need for humans and process and you know, even product management and things like that that actually matter. I mean, early CEOs have to be the product manager of the company as well, because you can't delegate that and say, look, I have an idea, but I need to hire somebody to do product management.
But wait, just a specific, like, how did you find, you and your co-founders you knew each other from Oracle, and then you were in a startup together. So one lesson is, yeah, be nice and get to know the people around you in the companies you're working at, because your co-founders likely will come from that network.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, you basically sort of just self-actualize each other, because you're bouncing this confidence.
You sort of have a meeting one day and you say, hey, we should start a company together?
We were meeting at Starbucks for 6 months.
I mean, and one of the three of you instigated and said, hey, let's go start a company.
Yeah, actually, you know, because there was an element of frustration, and Ajit one day just called me and said, you know what, if you really think we are that smart, then, because we were just talking about how the direction of that earlier employer should change. And it's like, if we are so full of ourselves, we think we are so smart, we should be doing it on our own dime.
Okay, so this is a sales line you should use with the people you want to recruit to be your co-founder.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you think you're that smart, if you have a fire in the belly, then don't try to do that experiment on someone else's dime. Do it in your own dime, actually. You know? And that's basically the first realization. So he actually called, and I said, you know what? It's not unthinkable. Even though I don't have all this money in the bank.
That's a lot of conviction. It's not unthinkable.
But then you start meeting, you know, it becomes a virtuous cycle. You know, you start meeting in Starbucks every day. You don't know the substance. All you know is the process of meeting in a Starbucks every day at 6 p.m. You meet for 2 hours. You bounce around ideas. The first thing you decide is, when do we quit? Because it's not about the idea. It's like, when do we quit? Because until we quit, this is not
real. Yeah.
Because anybody who says, I'm going to do this thing on the side, is kidding with themselves, actually. So you need to know when to quit, how to leave that bird in hand. And worst case, you have a 401k, and all of you here have a 401k. Dip into it. That's the worst that can happen. I mean, that is your thing to actually go back to. And by the way, your children will figure it out. Our parents didn't give us like all the money in the world to come to the US. If you didn't give them any money, they'll figure it out. In fact, they'll be better children. Today, I think about my children, I'm like, maybe we're just not doing it right by them, actually. So don't think about your 529 and 401k. Go figure out what it needs to be done. And eventually, you can always back into your 401k or something.
And how did you decide who of the three of you would be the CEO? Was that a
I think it was basically,
obvious,
both of them said, look, I think, you probably are, I don't know, I don't even know what the better amongst the three of us, because we were all good at some things, probably process, people, something like that, I mean, can't remember some of those things, but yeah, it was from day one, they said, look, you should be the CEO, and we'll have our roles, and I'm sure you had a very similar.
Yeah, what about you, Bipul? Were you meeting at 6 a.m. like before you came to work at Lightspeed? No.
So,
well, we used to sit in a Starbucks, in a coffee shop at Oracle 600.
yeah.
Like every day. Every day.
Yeah.
When are we quitting?
I mean, I certainly feel that time period between 2005, 2006 was very formative. And one thing I would say is that people talk about the company you keep. I truly benefited from it. I really had amazing company. I mean, in terms of Dheeraj, Poojan, Ajit, people around us.
I mean, even our manager, Amit Ganesh, it's like, we learned so much from him too, actually.
So very quickly, so in my case, I came up with this seed of this idea that this particular market and this particular product could have a pretty big impact. And I started thinking that who should be the co-founder of this company.
Okay.
And one thing that I thought about that is if you can hire a skill set, then that person cannot be your co-founder. So it has to be something which is not hireable. So I called two of my friends, and then first thing I thought was that we need to create a structure where we need to kind of keep each other equally accountable. So we created equal structure among three of us. Our fourth co-founder joined a little bit later. And since I came from business background and I had the product thoughts, so I decided to be the CEO of the company. But we had this very clear guardrail where we said, technology, we have the best co-founders, like 2/3 of the company is in technology. So I'm not going to interfere in technology, but I will run the business and my word will be the final word on business. And we pretty much stuck to it. And my co-founders were amazing technologists, thinkers, leaders, product builders. And they have given me great feedback, but eventually the buck stopped with me with respect to business decisions. And a lot of controversial decisions that we made of hiring 6 sales team before the product went into production. Those are the things that typically you have a lot of friction in the team to figure out what you want to do. But they both believed in my thought process and gave me a lot of leeway to execute.
Excellent. Well, I mean, Manishi, I think you're signaling we're out of time. Thanks, everybody, for being such a great audience and all the questions. Thank you, guys. Excellent. All right.
Guys, I want you all to spend much more time networking there. That's an opportunity you won't get. So I'm going to blitz through this in 5 minutes. What our plan is, for this accelerator that we are planning to set up. Also, this is number 10. Okay. Starting next month, we are going to start workshops. The workshops are free for any startup that has one co-founder that is an IITian. This is a free thing other than the cost of food. These are roughly the kind of sessions that we are going to cover. Number one is, how do you develop a concept? There are so many ways to develop a concept, but there are various streams. Somebody's up the hardware stream, somebody's up the business B2B stream, somebody's up the B2C stream. So each one has a different process by which they're thinking of how to come up with an idea. And for this, I'm trying to identify 3 experts in 3 different areas where they can tell you about the approaches they took to come up with the idea to start with, follow through with the market research and how they did the market research, which finally ended up in a business plan, which is what they would be executing. Okay, okay, and the next one is fundraising. That is, by the way, the survey I conducted, most IITians said, you know what, that is the biggest bugbear. We need help over there. Don't organize technical mentorship for us. We are the experts in our subject. You can't teach us. We can teach you back. Now, for fundraising, there are 2 areas. One is, how do you prepare a pitch for a VC? And the second thing is, when you cross the hurdle and you got a term sheet, how do you negotiate the term sheet? We have, fortunately with us, Naeem Zafar from Berkeley, and he has been talking at TIE, and I was very impressed with his talk, so I said, you know what, can you help us with this topic? These 2 topics will be anchored by Naeem. The next part is more the engineering side. How do you take a product design all the way through to production? And there we are going to identify some CTOs and VP engineerings to share their experiences with you. Each of these is a roughly 3-hour session. The 5th one is marketing, sales, and product support. Means, how do you get your beta customers? How do you take it to the next stage? How do you begin to drive sales, which is one of your major milestones, and that will take you, to the goals that you're wanting to reach. The final thing which every VC looks for is an exit, be it by way of an acquisition or be it by way of an IPO. Okay? So how do you approach the topic of an exit? It's at a very mature stage that you get to it, and we will have some specialists in that field addressing it. And finally, what we want to do is, from all the startups who go through our course, we are going to have an evaluation about who we think are ready enough to be presented to VCs. And we'll choose a day when we'll invite all the VCs and we'll have a demo day. I don't know if any of you have been to any of the accelerators around here, which are for-profit or non-profit, but they have a demo day. And the VCs come around, they hear a 5-minute pitch from each company, and they decide, you know what, I want to have a deeper look at you. So we will do that periodically, maybe in cycles of 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. But we'll have repetitive demo days, which will allow us to take this process forward. I don't know how the number 8 came there. I didn't put it there. Can I have the next slide, please? Number 11. No. Okay, can you go one back? One more back. Okay, so this is what our overall offering is going to be. Workshops, mentoring, portal-based. Portal-based means you send us your problems, and we'll have some people who will direct it to the proper experts who will respond to you in time and tell you, this is what we think your solution should be. The third item is dedicated advisors. Now, although we are a free marketplace for you, we will do our job for you as a non-profit free, but you can engage from our pool of advisors anybody you like, but that is a private for-profit arrangement outside our system. In other words, I connect a startup with a bunch of advisors. He chooses, I want to deal with him. Don't bank on the fact that the advisor wants to deal with you, because after all, the advisor is being paid by stock. likely, because you're broke. I mean, you don't have any money. So if he's going to be paid by stock, he's going to make sure you have what it takes to be successful, because that's how he's going to make up the money that for the time that he spent on you. So we cannot guarantee that a startup will get an advisor, that he likes. Star advisors will get a big rush. Then there'll be advisors who will be left by the wayside. Similarly, there'll be startups who will be left by the wayside. So this is something we can facilitate, but we do not interfere. We do not compel you. And the financial arrangement you strike with the advisor is entirely your business. We can give you all guidelines, but no more than that. Finally, the big advantage that we are trying to bring to you, after advisors, infrastructure. We are applying for our 501c3 once that is approved. Now that's it's a bit of a drawn-out process because IRS is very careful about 501c3 because the donor also gets a tax write-off. So we'll have to cross that hurdle, and we have appointed Fenwick and West as our attorneys to take us through that process so that we definitely get that thing, because otherwise we'll be stuck only at the stage of workshops. We can't get forward to the next stage. But once we get the 501c3 approval, I'll go on a massive fundraising campaign, and I'm pretty sure we will raise a lot of money. And with that, one of the things we want to do is to provide you infrastructure. And infrastructure by me, I mean there would be meeting rooms, there'd be hangout places. It depends. You can have the cool type of a place, or you can have a more structured place where you have cubicles and everybody's bent down on his computer. And I've seen different styles. I saw the StarTech style, which is more hangout style. I saw another one in Milpitas, which is much more like dedicated rooms. And again, we may try to have multiples, I'm thinking of two locations where we will have the infrastructure, maybe one on the East Bay, and one on, let's say, one in Milpitas and one in Mountain View. Okay, so that way, people who are living that side rather gravitate to a infrastructure that's available there, and people living this side will gravitate to that side. And the other major benefit that we are trying to bring to you is today IITians in Silicon Valley are 11,000 plus, okay? Now, all of them are not startup experts, but do remember, all of you who are going to build startups, your customer base invariably has an IITian in it. Look at any company. There are IITians crawling all over the place. Now, you want an entry into Cisco. Hey, there are tons of IITians in Cisco. You can get a friend and a buddy who will get you in there. Whether it's Oracle or Cisco or Google, anywhere, there are IITians there. And that's your lead point. They will, as a fellow IITian, they'll want to help you out, okay? So that's one. The other thing is we give you connectivity to angels and venture capital. That's a base that we are going to build. They are already approaching me, and many of them approach me, hey, Munishi, let's talk deal flow. I said, look, we are going to have a very transparent system. All startups can see all VCs and angels and advisors. Anybody can pick anybody. So it's not that we are going to influence this. And if you say we should be able to build that kind of credibility that if you say you're an IIT and you've come through this, workshop courses from us, they will believe you have some degree of basic quality. It's the kind of reputation that Y Combinators has got today. If you come through Y Combinators, the VCs will tend to look at you a little bit more favorably than if you didn't go through anything. Now, but they're a for-profit organization. We are not a for-profit. We are a non-profit. So because we are a non-profit, we cannot give you grants and ask you to give us stocks. That's something which will be a big problem for us because we have to maintain that 501c3 status. Other thing is we can connect you with industry experts, many of whom are IITians. But again, that part, whether it's an advisor, mentor, VC, angel, industry expert, they need not be IITians. They should be people who want to help IITians, like Ravi Mhatre, for instance. He's not an IITian, but he is very interested in helping the IIT crowd, okay? And finally, the long-term plan is the big disadvantage we face against the Stanfords and the Berkeleys and the Harvards, whoever, they have their accelerators have their parent institute right in their backyard. We don't have that advantage. But I happen to be an advisor to the IIT Madras Research Park, which is the first research park set up, and that's 2 million square feet. And Kharagpur directors also invited me to have a look at their research park, which they've set up in Calcutta, by the way, not in Kharagpur, which is a good thing because I refuse to go to Kharagpur. But I'm going to go around next year, not this year, next year, building a big bridgehead between all the campus research parks, and all of them have incubation cells. And they have generated a lot of companies that have, had good exits. I mean, I know IIT Madras has had 100 companies that have launched from there. So our second point is we are going to try to combine the startup, IIT Startups here. By the way, IIT Startup, I've got demands right now from Boston and New York and other places. And I said, hold it, guys. Let's prove the experiment successful in Silicon Valley, which is 70% of all the market. Once we do it here, let one of your young chaps come here. We'll tell them this is what we did. You go and do it over there, okay? But next phase, I mean, as I'm saying, we'll connect also with the research park. So we've got some very big plans where, as a worldwide organization with all the IITs and all these things combining, we will be bigger than Stanford, Berkeley, anybody, maybe all of them combined also. Because, no, I mean, the way IITs are mushrooming now, they say, No, they're saying, where is the next IIT coming up? So I think there was a skit last year. They said, Tere ghar ke samne. So that's all I have to say, guys. Now, there are about 200 startups that have signed up for this event today. The distribution, I think Indra Single will circulate it. But I want you to use this opportunity today while you're having your refreshments out there and your wine. Please mingle with each other, get to know each other. This is not an opportunity that will come every day. You have questions for me, you can always email me, and we are going to put it, I think Shrikant Chari is setting up a site. You can send the questions in there, and we will go through all of them, get our experts together, and we'll respond to you. But give us a little time, because we just got into this mode now. Thank you very much, and have a good night. Please go out there and enjoy yourself. Thank you. Thank you.